Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go.
Here on Eating a Meeting, we talk all things food and beverage as it relates to meetings and events, eating at a meeting, and how to be safe, sustainable, and inclusive. And I get to talk to amazing people in all facets of food and beverage, whether it's doctors or farmers, or my guest today, a chef, Susan Barocas. She's been cooking since she was 4 years old, and she finally made food her life professionally in 2012. After a career in public relations and as a documentary filmmaker. I'm so excited to learn more about that too. Today, she is a chef, a food writer, and a cooking instructor and speaker across the U.S. and internationally. So welcome to the show, Susan.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here.
I am so excited to have you. And I'm going to put the title of what we're going to talk about, Uncover the Rich Traditions of Jewish Cuisine with the Culinary Expert. So, and I got your name, and I'm going to, full disclosure, everybody, Susan and I are both members of the association called La Danse des Escoffiers. She's in D.C. and I'm in North Carolina. We randomly met in D.C. a couple weeks ago. I was so excited.
It's great.
But when I put out, hey, I'm looking for somebody, an expert in vegan cooking and Jewish, and everybody piped in Susan's name. So I'm like, we have to chat.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. So tell us a little bit about what you do as a cooking instructor and a speaker, and what do you speak on as it relates to food and beverage?
Right. Well, mostly I do talk about Jewish cooking. And specifically, my specialty is Sephardic food, or non-Ashkenazic food, which means food from the diversity of Jews beyond Eastern Europe, which in the United States isn't very well known. But Jews have lived every place in the world, and every place we went, we took the cuisine and just made it kosher. So like, for instance, in France, we wouldn't be cooking with butter if it's a meat dish. But we would still be cooking with local ingredients, seasonal ingredients, and the flavors of the places. So you have incredible Jewish, Persian food, Moroccan, Turkish, all these different places that we've lived. And that's what I love to do. And then I connect that to reducing waste and to eating healthy.
Okay. Well, okay. And that intrigues me as well, that you're incorporating all of those different, everywhere the Jews have lived, the food is like combined, and it makes a nice little, somebody said our friend Shar said she said a tossed salad versus a melting pot.
Yes.
Because a melting pot, everything just kind of disappears, but a tossed salad is a mixture of everything.
Yes. When my son was little, there's a singer that had this whole song about salad, how we're all salad. We make a great salad together. And I really believe that very much. And that's part of what guides me is I don't want these things to disappear. I don't want us all to assimilate. I want us to appreciate. And to me, there's a really big difference.
Yeah. Okay. Were you the one that told me that story? The sauce salad thing? I don't know. Anyways, it was in one of my conversations. Okay. So let's talk about because we're doing this conversation today because we're about to hit Passover.
Oh, yeah.
Which is one of the most prominent Jewish holidays, which also has some additional food restrictions or guidelines to follow. And I actually got a question from a planner a couple of weeks ago. Can you please help me understand what I'm supposed to serve my guests who are Jewish and want kosher, et cetera? So I really wanted to do this just before Passover. So thank you so much for doing this. So let's just jump back to the basics of, can you explain the basic principles of kosher dietary laws for everyone who's unfamiliar?
Sure. And there's these basic guidelines that are in our 5 books of Moses, what we call the Torah. and they appear in different places. These are guidelines. If you're very Orthodox, you also believe that it's the Word of God. And if you're very observant and adhere to that, some people say that Jews were originally vegetarian. And so as we entered in these other lands that had idol worshipers eating everything, that the Jewish people were very small, the Israelites. And so wanting to keep them alive, we came up with kashrut. There's all kinds of different interpretations, but what is it? So first of all, it's a mindful way of eating, and there's blessings associated with everything you eat. But very specifically, there are a few basics. So first of all, the laws of kashrut, which is keeping kosher kashrut, really pertain to living animals. So all vegetables, as long as they're clean so that there's no bugs on them, and because you can't eat, that would be an animal. Yeah, you do have to clean in a certain way, so it's very thorough. But it really applies to living animals. So for instance, certain things that you don't eat, pork, shellfish, you don't eat them. The law is that you're eating some with split hooves that chew their cud. So you can see that would limit some of those animals. How they're killed.
So that's what you are eating.
You are eating. So you can eat cows.
Okay.
You also, how an animal is killed. And this is really hewing to a more compassionate way of eating back in a time when you might just club an animal and eat it, or who knows, they would suffer much more. You try to reduce the animal's suffering. So for instance, many people refer to you have to sharpen your blade each time before you slaughter an animal, the kosher way. And you also do in one cut, you cut the jugular. They're gone. There's no suffering.
Okay.
Also, the blood needs to be drained from the meat. You shouldn't eat the blood of another animal. It's part of kashrut. Certain parts of the animal that are considered unclean aren't eaten. And also, and this is one that really can trip people up sometimes, meat and milk aren't eaten together. And
why is that?
I know, it's actually one of my favorite rules about kashrut, which is you should not cook the calf in its mother's milk that was meant to nourish it.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, all right. Yeah. So that's a big separation between meat and milk. Now, that means that you have meat food, dairy or milk food, and then you have parv. Parv's like neutral. You can eat it with either a meat or that's like vegetables. They can be eaten with meat or dairy dishes. Also, interestingly, the fish we eat, and it has to be fish with scales. The fish we eat, like salmon or tuna, that's also considered parv. So you can eat. And there's just there's so much variation within that, Tracy. I can't, all the way from people, it just depends on what people will eat and what they've adapted to themselves.
And I know I've shared this story before on the show, but I'm like, and it just goes to show, I'm like, last year, 2 years ago during Passover, I had a meeting and I had one woman who was Orthodox Jew. And so during Passover, we had to find her something. And then I had two other gentlemen who, one wanted the kosher meal from the kosher caterer for breakfast, but he would eat off the buffet for lunch and dinner. And then another one would eat off the buffet for lunch and dinner for all three meals, as long as everything was clearly labeled. Right. So that really goes to show that everybody follows a different guideline in their practice.
Oh yeah. This makes hosts and meeting planners crazy. Seriously. Okay. Yeah. And the best way to find out is to obviously ask participants. Also, by the way, the rules for Passover, the guidelines for Passover are different because you can't have grains like barley, oats, wheat that are, oh, wow. It starts to get really complicated, but basically you're not eating bread or things that rise.
Okay. Leavened.
You're not eating any kind of grain that's been exposed to moisture for more than 18 minutes before it's been cooked. So that's
what?
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? 18 being a very symbolic number. It's high numerically, which is life. But yeah, so like you couldn't eat regular pasta because that's not cooked within 18 minutes of the moisture hitting the flour. You have to have kosher Passover pasta, which you don't want to eat. Never shared with the White House about that, and no, you don't want to eat it. Right. But there are so many things you can eat. It's just so much in Judaism, whether it's about keeping kosher or about the rules of Passover or setting aside the Sabbath on Fridays. A lot of it is about separation, but in a good way. So it's the benefits of separating. So it's the same thing at Passover. Some people try to mimic, let's have noodles. Let's make a kosher for Passover roll. I don't do that. I love the 8 days. That is different. Plus, also, honestly, if you're eating fresh fruits and vegetables, really simple foods, very basic, healthy, not packaged foods, you can eat an awful lot. It's not like you have to worry.
So my friend Nancy just piped in here. Trust me, you want to pass on the Passover pasta. She agrees with you. For that, Nancy.
It becomes glue, basically.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, good to know. Now, glatt kosher versus kosher. So explain that.
Okay. So glatt kosher is really just a general term for a higher level of supervision and inspection. And one of the big differences is that the meat, if it's glatt kosher, they have to inspect the lungs to make sure that they were smooth and with no defects. That's glatt kosher meat. And there's different levels of supervision. And if you go to the store and you look at kosher products, you see there's all these different symbols. There's U and there's K and there's a circle and a star. So those are also different levels of supervision. That's how you can tell. Because like if somebody is very orthodox, they're glatt kosher, they're not going to eat some of those products, even though they're what's called hechshered. Hechshered is the term for what those symbols are, meaning like they're blessed that they were supervised, but not the level of supervision. Kosher is the big general term.
Right.
And within that, there's this other kind of level. Yeah, that changes. I mean, it's eating according to these laws, and it's actually from kosher, just kosher, to glatt kosher. There are so many steps. And what you indicated about the people at the meeting and what they would eat. Like some people who keep kosher will eat anything vegetarian or vegan, I should say, anything vegan that is cold. And some people will eat vegan that's cooked. And then some people will eat vegetarian, like eggs. Some people might even eat cheese if you can tell them that the cheese has no animal rennet. Unless kosher cheese can have kosher animal rennet. Otherwise, it really does need to be from plant sources or microbiome.
Okay, so you just blown my mind in so many directions.
I know.
And you did make a good point, because this is going to drive meeting planners crazy. So how do we, I recommend on a registration form saying, do you follow kosher? Or do you follow halal? But if somebody says kosher, what's the next question when I pick up the phone and I call you? How do I politically correct, nicely ask you, what should I be preparing for you?
Oh, yeah. I think that's what you ask is, so, I'm aware that there's other levels of kosher, of keeping kosher, and I want to get it for what is comfortable for you and give you some good food. So what is it that you're comfortable eating? Your form, by the way, could say kosher, glatt kosher. And right there, you would separate anyone. If it's glatt kosher, you're going to be ordering meals that come in a sealed container. It's like on an airplane, you can get glatt kosher. Sealed container, people will eat it only out of those containers or on paper plates that are disposable. So it might be worth saying kosher, glatt kosher. Not so many people are going to be probably glatt kosher that are coming to these meetings, but you can get some. I lead tours in the spring with Savor, this project that I'm co-founder of. And last year we were on a cruise and we had one person who was glatt kosher and they accommodated him with his meals, which is lovely. So, and there were some people who kept kosher, so they ate from the buffet, just like your folks. Right? They ate from the buffet, but they were eating vegetarian.
Okay.
Yeah. And that, by the way, one of the really easy ways to deal with this in a meeting situation is to make sure you have lots of fresh food that's served raw, like raw salads, whether it's a fennel salad or a carrot salad or whatever, that doesn't have cheese.
Right.
And that you can say vegan. If you say vegan, many people who keep kosher now will eat that.
Well, now you're going to scare off all the meat eaters. Just that's
no.
I know that's just a jab because there's such a bad connotation with the word vegan sometimes too. So it's So meeting planners have a delicate balance in trying to feed everyone, right?
It really is.
Yeah. But you could also say whole food plant based.
You can say whole food plant based. That's perfect. Yeah. That's even better because you're right. The word vegan has gotten this weird. Yeah, I'm sorry for that because that's all it means.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So,
okay, so
by the way, there's one other step I just want to mention. There's kosher style. Let's make this real.
Well, in the state of Massachusetts, you cannot say that. It's illegal.
What?
I know. I found that out like a decade ago. I need to go look the law up, but it says you're not allowed to use that terminology. Yeah.
I had never heard that. Because kosher style just means you're not mixing dairy and meat at the same meal. And there's no foods that someone who keeps kosher wouldn't eat, like shrimp or pork or crab, that kind of thing. But you're not having blessings on everything. The food is not necessarily hechshered. It wasn't produced under supervision. That's kosher style. I had never heard that. Wow.
And I'm going to look.
You want to look it up? Oh, are you?
Yeah, I'm going to look it up. I'm going to try to find it. Yeah, because I found that out like a decade ago when I first started doing all of this. Actually, that's like 13 years ago, but I will look up the law and find it. But so in an essence, in saying, hey, I'm not going to serve meat with dairy. I'm not going to serve shellfish, or I'm going to have dishes that don't have shellfish and pork and etc. So, okay.
It's also, by the way, the same thing applies for Passover in that some people will eat out, but they will eat nothing that has anything that wouldn't be kosher for Passover. So bread, noodles, all that kind of stuff. And other people won't eat out at all for the whole week.
Okay. Well, okay. And then I've had some people say, like one gentleman told me he grew up with his mom had 7 sets of dishes in the house. And one of them was to go eat pizza on the porch on Saturday. Probably not on Saturdays, but so even in the house, and there's different levels of people following it in a household, correct? Yeah.
No, not usually in the same house. No. I mean, they might outside the house, but you have everyday meat and dairy. You have your special meat and dairy, like for your Shabbat and other holidays. And then you have that's 4 so far. And then you have meat and dairy for Passover. That's 6. And then you have pizza on the porch. That's 7. Wow. That's how that happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't do that. I don't eat, so.
Right. Okay. So you don't need meat. Yeah. So you eat kosher style, vegan.
I eat plant forward.
Plant forward.
And I don't buy cheese that has animal rennet because I'm eating more. And I'm not vegan. I eat eggs. And I also, I'm pescatarian. I will eat salmon or cod.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I used to be much stricter about that, but now I do eat. And so anything that would be considered a kosher fish, I would eat. Yeah.
Okay.
And so there's really not a need to even think about, is it kosher style? Because everything else has already dictated that, I mean, somebody they could say they're keeping kosher with the way I'm eating. Okay. And I also don't have more than one set of everyday dishes. But what I do have is my dishes are clear glass cooked, that's cleaned in a dishwasher at like 500 degrees, your usual dishwasher temperature, actually can be considered by many people to be either meat or dairy. Which is
why a glass dish versus a white dish?
Because it's not porous.
Oh.
Ceramic is porous. Yeah. So you can really clean it completely.
Right.
And so I've had people who keep kosher come to my house and eat off of my dishes.
Okay. Because you're
They know that the food I'm serving is, according to the way I eat, is the same as what they could eat. And then I'm serving it on dishes that they can use.
Okay. All right. So I want to go back to the cross-bordering, how food travels across borders. Can you talk about that and the Jewish traditions? And I can't say the word, but you said and it begins with an A.
So non-Ashkenazic, so not Eastern European.
Okay. So can you talk about how the Jewish traditions have crossed those borders? And if we're going to Europe and we're producing an event in Europe and we have somebody that says they want kosher, I mean, it's picking up the telephone and saying, what can I safely feed you or properly safely feed you? Talk about all of that. Yeah.
Wow.
I know. Sorry. I just threw like 5 zillion questions in one.
First of all, I think that it's really lovely that you talk about picking up the phone and asking, because that right there indicates such an acceptance and such an openness and understanding that, okay, this is different from how other people are going to eat, but I want you to be nourished. How can we do that best? And I think that's really lovely. And right there, I think a lot would get accomplished. Now, when I talk about recipes across borders, and this applies also to Eastern European, but we all know that recipes travel and they travel with people, right? So the Jews have wandered a lot throughout the world and throughout history. And my own personal history being what's called Sephardic. So my ancestors came from medieval Spain. They were thrown out and most of them went to the Ottoman Empire, as did about 120,000 to 130,000 Jews and what they called conversos, people who converted but still hung on to their Judaism. So when they traveled, they took all these recipes. I cook dishes that are in Inquisition testimony. People cook the foods. Yeah. That's how we know a lot about the 2 ways we know about what did these Jews eat. And by the way, Spain before the Christian reconquest and persecution, Spain during the Muslim era from the 700 to 1100s was the center of the Jewish world. There were, they think, up to 500,000 Jews there, more than any place else in the world. So you're talking about a huge tragedy towards this population with many thousands killed, starting mostly in the 1300s, and then with the Inquisition and the expulsion. What happened? Women took these recipes with them. So first, when you were in Spain, if you were cooking with onions or garlic or leeks and your neighbor smelled it or your maid saw you, they could report you to the Inquisition and did. And you were arrested because there was a very distinct cuisine of the Jews of Spain. Very distinct. It had much more in common with the Muslim rulers than it did with Christians. Christians didn't eat like green vegetables and alliums and all that. Yeah. And so that was number one way that we know about it is, as I said, from the Inquisition testimony. Like in the accusation papers and the testimony, all kinds of dishes, something called cuajada, which is an egg vegetable dish. There's all kinds of ways that we know eggplant dishes. Now, what happens? People leave. So the people left and the women carried the recipes to their new homes, many of which were in the Ottoman Empire, which, as you may know, was huge, like Syria, Israel, North Africa, Budapest, almost Vienna. It was huge. And also the Ottomans were foodies. They had about 2,000 ships a year came into the Constantinople harbor that were carrying all this food from all over the world and spices and plants. So when the Jews got to the Ottoman Empire, there was this great marriage of food and recipe sharing. So that's the whole idea of how food travels and what do we hang on to. The Jews hung on to keeping kosher. Okay, so they were still doing that, but they were also cooking the dishes and they were adapting to local ingredients and season. And something that I just love is when I see these recipes for things that were made from scraps, food scraps. Like there's a wonderful spinach stem. Spinach was used a lot, both in Spain and then years after. But they would take the stems off. They didn't throw them away. They made a dish with spinach stems.
Kind of dish because I've been throwing them in the bag to freeze and put in my soup.
That's what I do. I very often just do that. All of us should be saving our veggie scraps in the freezer and making soup. There's cascaricas. Cascaricas is a dish made from zucchini peels because you peel the zucchini to put into certain dishes. Nowadays, I make those dishes without peeling the zucchini, but back then you would. And then you'd make this lovely sweet and sour dish from the zucchini peels.
Wow.
And even in Eastern Europe, think about in Eastern Europe, like schmaltz, the rendered chicken fat. Well, that's using everything. It's taking the skin and the fat, which you take off, and you render it, especially the fat back then. I use the skin too if I make it, but it's really very important to think about that we're not the first ones to do this. In fact, we need to get back to it because how did people eat up until refrigeration and transportation? Right. They ate local and seasonal. And there's a very interesting story about noodles, which actually the first record of is in, I think it's the 7th century in these tablets from Arabia. But in Eastern Europe, you would have all the bread would dry out during the week, right? Because it was no preservatives. You would take that bread, soak it in water, mix it with goose fat or chicken fat, and make it into basically a dough. You would roll that dough out, cut it, and you'd have noodles. So on Friday for Shabbat, when you want a special meal, you'd have these noodles in your soup that were made from all these stale ends of bread.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
I think that people used to really know much more about how to eat waste-free.
Right.
And we've gotten that, and it's like, let's go back. Let's go back.
Yeah. Very cool. I had a question in there. There's that term like nose to tail, right? Using an animal from nose to tail. But it's the same thing with the vegetable, using it from nose to skin to insides and utilizing that. And I learned from my friend Nancy Waldeck a decade plus more to take those vegetable scraps and put them in the bag. And I put the onion peels in the other day and my mom's like, what do you mean the onion peels? I'm like, no, they have a lot of flavor.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Adding that in.
There's actually a dish, if I can interrupt here. There's a dish called huevos haminados. That's the hard cooked eggs that used to be cooked in the Sabbath stews. And nowadays, the way that if you want to cook it outside of a Sabbath stew, which is an overnight stew cooked on a very low heat, that was done, people know cholent, that's the Eastern European term, adafina in Spain, amin in North Africa. But the way that I make these huevos, eggs, haminados, hard, is that I put a whole bunch of onion peels that I save in a separate bag in my freezer. Some of them go into the soup, but I save a bunch and I put them down in the pot, put the eggs on top, pack them in, and then fill it with cold water. And I always add a pinch of coffee grinds, and then it's why, because that's how my grandmother, that's like a lot of people do that. But we don't it helps color the eggs, which the onion peels do too. And then some people put a little vinegar. I put a little salt, and you cover it. You put on the top of the water, you put oil, like olive oil, so that it helps keep it from boiling out as fast. I put more onion peels, and you cook them for 6 to 8 hours on the stove. You can also
make a hard-boiled egg.
Yeah.
I need to talk to Virginia Willis because Virginia Willis told me how to do it in 35 minutes.
35? I mean, I walked in when I was doing the second Passover at the White House. I walked in at 9 a.m. and said, okay, you got the onion peels. We got to get those eggs up. We don't have a lot of time. We got to hard boil the eggs. And they're like, who is this crazy lady? It takes 13 minutes or whatever to have a hard boiled egg. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. So, what happens then is a transformation of the egg. So it loses all the sulfur taste and smell. The whites become a beautiful brown. like kind of tannish.
Huh?
And the yolks become like a pale yellow, a very pretty pale yellow. And there's a tradition where you take the eggs out after a few hours and you just very gently with the back of a spoon tap the shells and you create these incredible designs on the egg. Yeah. I should have sent you a picture of that. Do you want me to?
Yeah. Yeah. Send me a picture of that. That'll be cool to share later.
Yeah.
Okay. So because we're talking about all this, are there other traditional Jewish dishes that are quite, even more traditional dishes that we should be paying attention to that could be incorporated into everyday lives that meet both kosher guidelines as well as non-kosher guidelines and that are delicious?
Everything? No, it's Jewish food in the U.S. is considered Ashkenazic food, Eastern European food. Bagels, bialy, pastrami, baka, all that stuff, right? And even the kind of chicken soup that is most popular. It's all this from the Eastern European. It is a matter of numbers because even though there were more Sephardic Jews in the world, or non-Ashkenazic Jews, I should say, from all over the world, when we came to America from basically the big immigration of 1890 to 1920, 22, you had 2 million Eastern European Jews come during that time, including part of my family, mostly from the Pale of Russia, Poland, Lithuania, that whole. Then you also had 30 to 40,000 Oriental Jews. So those who didn't, they're called Oriental Jews, those who didn't speak Yiddish, at first were not considered Jewish. I heard from somebody who was a young man who came during that time, and he said that because what they spoke was the language of their country that they came from, Turkish or Greek or whatever, and Ladino, the language of the Sephardic Jew, which was, over time, it was the Spanish of the Middle Ages, not modern Castilian. The Spanish of the Middle Ages mixed with a little Hebrew, a little Greek, a little Turkish, some Judeo-Arabic, wherever you came from. And it wasn't Yiddish, and no one could understand them. So they wrote to the chief rabbi of Cuba saying, what's with this? They say they speak Spanish. Are they Jewish? And he had to write back to Ellis Island and say, yes, they are Jewish. But you can see that imbalance of numbers. Well, why is it that we don't know burekas and baklava is a whole other thing because it's become popular in its own right. But we don't know about Sephardic and Mizrahi, which is Persian, and Yemenite, and Maghrebi, which is North Africa. We don't know those foods as being typically Jewish the way that we know these other foods from the delis and just the number of families. And so that was a really huge influence. I lost whatever the question was.
It's okay. It was like, what can everyone eat that follows traditional things? But I'm going to switch that a little bit. I mean, how have those traditional dishes been adapted to contemporary tastes?
Well, one thing is many of them have been made plant forward. So like you have really yummy vegan or vegetarian chicken soups. Actually, they tend to be plant forward vegan because what you can do is it can involve cooking a lot of vegetables. You can roast the vegetables first and you get this rich taste, especially by the way you get it from those onion skins, which give you the golden color that you want.
Okay.
And matzo balls can be made vegan. There's all different ways to make matzo balls if that's your thing. But you also can make the small yandi. You can make the small little meatballs from Beyond Meat. Or imagine, you can do, you can adapt things. I just did an event that was a Jewish food conference, and I was the chef de cuisine for 200 people for 3 days. I force-fed them. No. But no, we did. But we had a Turkish dinner one night, and it was meatballs. And for most people, we're eating the meatballs. And by the way, our sauce was a tahini sauce, which was delicious together. And of course, meat and milk, it was fine. But they had these wonderful with herbs and this and that. Well, we also served Beyond Meat meatballs with all the herbs and this and that. And they were delicious too. And so totally inclusive.
Right.
So there's a
And tahini
tahini plant forward.
Okay. All right. Awesome. And then just for people to know, tahini is made out of sesame seeds. So that takes, the paste, it takes the milk option out of that. So no, that sounds delicious. And were those gluten-free as well? And actually, I have a question from Instagram here. Toby is asking, would love to hear more about Passover at the White House.
That was fun.
So tell us about that.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it was the last 3 seders that President Obama did in the White House, but they're private. And so there are 20 to 22 people. And I worked in the kitchen with the wonderful Christina Comerford, who's the executive chef, and Susie Morrison, who's the pastry chef. And they're just terrific. But it was very interesting. The first year I didn't do as much. It happened that there was a guest chef. I was asked to be a guest chef there because Michelle Obama was not happy with the food. Like, she felt like it wasn't healthy enough. It's very traditional Ashkenazic Eastern European food. And so I was brought in. The first year I did a chicken with preserved lemons and olives, which is a very classic Moroccan dish, and not a lot else. I rolled some matzo balls that were already made. And then, I don't know, I guess they trusted me. So the second year I got to have an influence on the menu much more. And I was able to make those huevos haminados and also to make Moroccan haroset balls. So haroset's one of the very big symbolic foods that's served at a Passover Seder. And the haroset is a mixture that's supposed to be evocative of the bricks and mortar that the Hebrew slaves were forced to work for the Pharaoh to build storehouses. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. So you have, if you ever look up haroset with either CH or just an H, ROSET, you will find so many recipes. It's so classic. It's really representative to me of every place Jews have lived. Iraqi haroset might just be date syrup, salon with some walnuts, maybe a little cardamom in some people's. Persian, they make a Persian haroset. It's got 4 kinds of nuts and fresh fruit, pears and apples and dried fruits and vinegar and ginger. I mean, it's completely different.
Right.
Well, because people were cooking with what was around them too. Why is the haroset, most people know in the U.S., it's apples and walnuts? Because they would be lucky in Russia if they had that left in the cellar at the end of the winter. Anyway, so at the White House, gosh, that was a fun time. It was very fun.
Who was that dinner for?
It was basically for Jewish staff members and some of the first family's close friends. Okay. So I believe Valerie Jarrett was there the first year. There were just different people, but it was a lot of the staff members who were Jewish. And President Obama always did a Seder at the White House. Every year he was used to doing Seders, and you hear him bellowing out, singing "Let My People Go" and other songs. You're like, oh my God, you just get chills thinking about how this crossed over brings together so many people.
That's awesome. And did you get to use vegetables from the herb garden or from the White House garden?
No, interestingly, no. And I probably, because the time of year that wasn't
true
there. Yeah. But I did add a lot of green. One thing that I had learned about this from a farmer who lived in Maryland. It was a very interesting saute because end of winter, right? So it was radishes, spring onions, and garlic sauteed.
Oh, yummy.
So good. You got to do it.
Oh my God. I am going to do that.
You slice your radishes and you start them off first. And then you can add your spring onions and your garlic. Oh my God. And it was, so the second and third years we had that. We had an arugula salad with roasted squash, butternut squash and pomegranate and a citrus dressing.
Oh, that's so much better than just pulling the arugula out of the box and eating it with dressing.
Arugula is one of my favorite ingredients. There's so much.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's also, when I think about, like I'm putting together a Passover menu now for my Seder.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, okay, what's going to be at the market? And that's what we all should be thinking. And by the way, I shop mostly at farmers markets once I can, when they're open. And even in the winter, there are some farmers markets in DC that are open. They don't have as much, but now we're starting to get into
everything.
Supporting farmers and farmers markets because you will get better food, fresher food. They pick that morning or the day before.
Okay. 100% agree. I went last week and my friend Steven and Ryan had fresh everything. So I'm like, let me have it. Now I got it.
That's
now
the
I got to eat it all. And now let me eat it all. Yeah, exactly. As we're approaching Passover and we've got events, and my event is not happening during Passover this year, which is a good thing and a bad thing. Yeah. Actually, when I did it 2 years ago, it was also Ramadan. So I'm like, oh my gosh, please give me everybody. But I only had the one Passover, the one kosher person. But can you share what would be, I mean, because we're going to have, if I had that woman again coming and she's Orthodox Jew, is there something that we should be asking for dishes from that kosher caterer, or just go by with what they've got?
Well, Passover presents another dilemma because most people thoroughly clean their kitchens and pull out Passover dishes if they're keeping kosher, as we talked about, and will only eat really kosher for Passover food, which is another level. And so your kosher caterers, some of them convert to being kosher for Passover, some don't.
Right. It was hard to find the caterer that would do that.
Right. It is hard. And I would check with her because, she might be willing to eat salads, cold salads. As we talked about, there's so many shades of how you keep kosher and how you keep kosher for Passover.
Right. Yeah. And it goes back to what you said earlier too, is that a lot of people don't even go out because it's just challenging, even more challenging to confine that. Is there anything like that you really think that we should understand better about the kosher cuisine in feeding people in other times of the year?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think we should all try to understand that this is, I know a lot of people think of it as, oh my God, this is such a pain. But it's just like if somebody's going to be gluten-free, it's another way of eating, but it is a choice. So sometimes people but so is being a vegetarian.
Right.
It's a choice. So is being vegan, right? And I think just to understand that there are so many different levels, and the only way you're going to get it right is to talk to the people involved. It's the only way. Yeah. And I think that as meeting planners and event planners, you want to try to be respectful. So I can tell you this story about when I did a reception for a film I had made and got the British Embassy to host a reception before the screening at the Kennedy Center. And it was so lovely. And the social secretary says, oh, we're so excited. I will send you a menu so you can look it over. The menu came and it was bacon wrapped water chestnuts, skewers of shrimp. It was just, so first of all, it was great Passover. And second of all, it was just like, I was just stunned. And I sent, out of courtesy for the people there, it would be better because there were it was a Holocaust.
Right.
Holocaust survivors and liberators and rabbis. And I said, this is the kind of event that let me help you understand what we can have. But then it was during Passover and they could make anything with that. So what I did was found a caterer in town in DC who was converting to Passover cooking. And we had a table, and the table said, this is kosher for Passover from XYZ caterer. If you are observing kashrut for Passover, please feel comfortable eating here. And for everyone else, we have all this other food. And it worked. So now my question is, did that food get eaten? Yes. Oh, yeah.
Because there's so many times, and I think your event is a little bit different because it was a movie about the Holocaust, but so many times planners order the kosher meals and the people don't pick it up because they're like, oh, I can eat that off the buffet. And I think it goes back to that thing, like, let's pick up the phone and ask them.
Will you eat off the buffet, or what will you eat off of a buffet?
Right.
And do you need a kosher meal just in case, or is this a kosher meal because you really don't want to eat off the buffet? And obviously, if it's meat of any kind or chicken, then, it has to be kosher.
Right.
But yeah, I know it's so hard. It's so hard to predict the quantity of food you don't want to waste, and you have to have enough. And yeah.
Well, and then the kosher meals, when you're ordering them from a hotel and and you want that kosher meal from the kosher caterer, I was charged $176 for dinner, and my regular dinner at the hotel was $100, right? So my breakfast, to get a kosher meal for breakfast, is $110. So it really does. I think it really does lend itself to saying, hey, let's pick up the telephone and understand what level of observance that you're having, no matter what time of year it is. Because
the thing is, kosher food is more expensive because it's supervised. So you have that at the level. Yeah. But it should not, unfortunately, I think sometimes it's taken advantage of, unfortunately.
Right. Delivery charges and other stuff.
Right. Yeah. You have all that added in for sure. But yeah.
Okay. Well, all right. I think we're done. No more questions. I haven't gotten any other questions, but this has been a really good overview. Thank you so much, Susan. It's quite helpful, and I love the historical aspect around it and how the meals have changed and traveled. And I think that's really important. I interviewed a woman a couple of years ago who's trying to find those recipes and help people realize the recipes. And she's from South America, and making sure that those recipes are getting translated, because with the internet and with younger kids, they're not in the kitchen with grandma anymore, and those recipes aren't as close to the heart. So I really think it's valuable.
Thank you.
I'll introduce you to. Yeah.
I think that there's a few things I would say, by the way, and meeting planners should be looking at this, and caterers and hotel people. There are amazing cookbooks that are out there. And
right. How do I say now? How do I say that?
Pesach. Thank you.
Okay, say that again.
Hag, which is basically a way of saying Happy Passover more in Hebrew. And in my tradition, we say Pesach Alegre, which is Happy Passover, kind of in Ladino. But I was going to say, thank you. Whoever wrote that, thank you.
Nancy did. Yeah. Yes.
I think that in my experience, caterers and hotel chefs don't always want to move off of what's comfortable and what they know. And there is such a wide variety of food out there, whether it's kosher or not. Before we went live, we were talking about, we have Japanese, we have Mexican, and that's kind of where it stopped. And even the Mexican and Japanese is not so authentic. If people really care, it's not that big a deal to be able to do authentic recipes from different places. And I think that it's very much appreciated, and that especially hotels and caterers can become known for doing special, really different, it's like I talked about those meatballs, right?
Right.
Was not so different. Yeah, there were a few more ingredients than some of the meatballs. The result was so outstanding. And honestly, they were fixed. They had to be fixed a day ahead because of the Jewish Sabbath. They were fixed ahead. They were not fried. They were baked. Then they were reheated, and they were delicious. And they were done over the course of 48 hours. So this is all possible. And I would just like to encourage all the people involved in food at different levels to please look beyond. Go look, there's great cookbooks, find other chefs from different cuisines. It can all be scaled up.
Right.
Almost everything.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. That's so fun.
No, I love that. Thank you very much. Okay. So my final question that I ask everyone is, what does a safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experience look like to you?
I think for me, it's It's one that, first of all, it's primarily one that I can eat. It's like not going to a restaurant. Everything is a meat dish of some sort, where everything is gluten and cheese, and it's having healthy food that's accessible. And I love knowing, or even seeing sometimes, they use so much like of the vegetable, for instance, top to tail. I love that. You get some radishes with those beautiful roots. Leave them on there. It makes me feel happy. I think, and I think also the freshness of food speaks to the safety of the food to some extent. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a thinking. Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right. So I've got your Instagram handle here, so everybody can follow you on Instagram.
Thanks.
Just your first name and your last name. Yep. And then your Savor Experience is that Jewish traditional experience?
Savor Experience has to do with Sephardic food and music. That was started with a Ladino singer named Sarah Aroeste, and we have this whole project going that we go all over. We teach, we see food, we sing, and we lead Jewish heritage, especially Sephardic, travel adventures. So awesome. I'm going to Rome, and I'm going from Rome to Sevilla in May.
Nice. Awesome. Very cool. All right. Well, everybody check that out. Join her.
Yeah. Savor Experience is a very interesting way to start to get to know about other Jewish cultures and histories.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you. And I'm going to just say happy Passover, because the words are not there for me to say. So happy Passover. I will figure that out. And I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. And I appreciate that you are so focused on doing this, Tracy. It's really wonderful.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Okay. All right. Tomorrow, there is a special episode of Eating at a Meeting tomorrow, because tomorrow is Global Meetings Industry Day. Mm-hmm. And so it's actually at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'm talking about the IMEX Frankfurt. Toby Diva from Atlanta says, thank you to both of us, Susan.
Thanks.
So I'm talking to Roger and Eric about the IMEX Frankfurt sustainability practices and around food and beverage. So tune in at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. But until then, stay safe and eat well. And I'll be back next week actually talking about sustainable beer. So I'm excited about that. Yeah.
That's nice.
All right. Everyone stay safe and eat well.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.